Welcome into the Hot Read podcast for Wednesday, August the 30th. I'm your host, Easton Freeze, director of published content here at BroadwaySportsMedia.com. We're also brought to you by the 440 Podcast Network. You can follow me on social media at Easton Freeze. I'm joined as always by producer JT, who you can follow on social media at JT_Ruhnke. JT, happy NFL roster cutdown day. It has been a crazy one. How are you?
It has been a crazy one. Only further impacted by the fact that I had to drive an hour's worth today to meetings that we were both attending today.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, during that time that I was driving half an hour up and half an hour back, all of the Titans cuts happened.
That's when it all came, right?
And
exactly.
I was like,
Naturally.
do I try to react to this, or do I drive my car safely? So
exactly. And speaking of those meetings, we do not to bury the lead on today's topic, which is going to be everything Titans roster cut down. Hopefully, we have a lot of questions today. I'd love for today's episode to be largely Q&A. Have a lot of thoughts that I'm going to offer up on the Titans roster, but I want to hear from you guys in the comments. So head on over to Broadway Sports Media on YouTube, Broadway Sports Media's YouTube page. Very important to be there today instead of on Facebook or on Twitter, because that's where you can find this live stream and comment where we can see them on our end. Would love to hear your thoughts and or questions. Who is the most shocking guy that you saw cut from the roster? Maybe the guy you're most disappointed to see not on the 53-man roster. Maybe the decision that they made to keep a guy on the roster you found the most interesting. I want to hear all of those things from you guys, and we'll discuss it all on today's show. But that meeting we attended it was the final meeting to sign the papers on a very exciting deal for the Hot Read podcast, something that we'll be announcing on Thursday. Just to tease that a little bit, we'll be doing live shows starting week 1 all the way through the NFL season this year. And those will be weekly on Thursdays in a Nashville area location where we're going to be hanging out, doing the show live, hanging out with any of you that come out to hang with us, and then watching Thursday Night Football together in a really awesome environment. So we will discuss that on Thursday, but super excited about that deal that we struck for this year for the Hot Read podcast. And for those of you that are local here in Nashville, we'll talk more on Thursday. Make sure to be a part of that show so that you hear what we've got going on. Today, we saw a lot of players around the NFL be waived, be cut. Unfortunately, they are unemployed. We saw many others get the call that they had made the 53-man roster, and some dreams were fulfilled, some dreams were crushed. We have to start where every good roster breakdown, cut down day discussion should start, and that is with the kicking position. The Titans have a kicker. His name is Nick Folk, and he was traded for by Ran Carthon and company earlier today. Nick Folk from the Patriots. The Titans send New England a 2025 7th-round draft pick, which was the exact trade compensation sent to L.A. from the Browns for, I'm blanking on his name. JT, help me out. Can you remember off the top of your head? Dustin Hopkins. Thank you. So they kind of, I think, take that trade as a template, use that in their dealing with the Patriots today, and they get a kicker in Nick Folk. So on the bright side, you have an actual kicker on the roster now. We don't have a blank next to kicker anymore, and you've got somebody that is reliable. Some numbers on him from last season. His stats since joining the Patriots in 2019, courtesy of Pro Football Reference, 89.3% on field goals, which is a perfectly serviceable NFL starting kicker number. Nearly 90% on your field goals. With a long of 54, he has hit 12 of 17 in the past, 3 seasons, which is set just north of 70% from 50 yards and longer. He's 36 of 44 from 40 to 49. So in that 40s range, he is 81, almost 82%, which is that money zone, that Ackerman zone that he is looking. Special teams coordinator Craig Ackerman wants his guys to be money from that area, and it looks like that is something that Folk is pretty good at. And then he has 58 of maybe the most secure number, most reassuring number of them all. 58 of 58 from under 40 yards, which is perfect record. He is 91% on extra points, which is maybe a little bit more concerning than you'd like, but certainly hits his extra points. Here's the number that is concerning, though. Nick Folk is just 12.2% on the total number of kickoffs of his that have gone for touchbacks, with an average kickoff distance of 59 yards. So that's the biggest initial question that we'll have to have answered. We'll ask the players and the coaches when we get there, and talk to them later this week. But you don't really have a guy that is a reliable kickoff option right now. Ryan Stonehouse, the punter, everybody is pointing to is, well, just let Stoney's got a leg. He's got an absolute boot on him. Let him kick off. Mike Vrabel made that clear on Monday to us in the media that that's not really an option. It's not something that he has done since I think since high school, which is, it's been a while for him. JT, by the way, on your end, I'm getting some feedback. I don't know if the feed can hear that or not, but if there's something out loud on your end, I'm not sure.
Yeah, there's a bunch of people outside my apartment complex right now just digging a creek. Like they got
digging a creek.
They got sure equipment. They got bulldozers out there. There's a bunch of rocks. They're just digging away outside.
Well, then never mind. I thought it was
complex.
a technical issue. Nothing you can do about that. So we'll hope they go away.
There's nothing I can do, but I'm watching them right now. They're doing a good job at building a creek, man. But why? Sure. I don't know.
Okay. All right. Well, so yeah, with Nick Folk not being able to kick off well, I mean, I think he's going to be their choice because they don't really have another one unless there is some mystery player on this roster that can suddenly decide he can kick out of bounds, or not out of bounds, out the back of the end zone for touchbacks on a regular basis on kickoffs. Unless that guy steps forward and unveils himself, Nick Folk is all you got, and 12.2% touchback rate on your kickoffs with an average kickoff distance of 59 yards. Simply not going to cut it. All you really can hope for is that the new touchback rule, now that players returning kickoffs can fair catch the ball from outside of the end zone, and that qualifies as a touchback. You just got to hope that as teams opt for that, and hopefully the analytics dictate that's what you should do from a certain distance. We'll get those numbers pouring in as they start to do this. You got to hope that that's your saving grace, because otherwise Craig Ackerman's kickoff coverage team is going to be put under a lot of pressure that, frankly, I'm not sure is going to go very well for them. But JT, I think that's what they have to do.
Yeah, I mean, you could look at the preseason so far and you've seen like this touchback rule like not really be a factor, but I think mostly that's just because there was a lot of guys who wanted to return these kicks and prove that they're worth a spot on the roster, right? Like definitely as we get into it, it'll be really interesting to see how much of this touchback rule is really put into effect here. I think if anything, maybe that's why there were some surprises today, that maybe because of this new rule, special teams is not being factored in as much, I think. Could be a factor of why some of these guys made the roster and why some other guys didn't. A couple of comments here from the comment section based on the kicking debate. Joey Turner said, "Who's ready to watch Folk completely forget how to kick this season / battered fan syndrome." So that's always something great. And then Alex Titan says, "Titans revolving door of kickers and Colts revolving door of QBs. Name a better duo."
One things is better than the other, I'd say.
Yeah,
but neither.
And then I think that's it on the kicking side of it, but we have a lot to talk about with the rest of the team here.
So let's dive into the rest of the team. And as Nick Folk took one of those 53 spots, that made the easy math of, okay, now once again we have 3 specialists on this team. Those 3 are the 3 that you cut off the 53, you get a square 50. So you get, in theory, 25 offensive and 25 defensive players. The Titans ended up going with 26 offensive and 24 defensive players, which in discussions with folks in the media in the past couple weeks has been something that I was kind of expecting. I know in my last prediction for the 53-man roster, I did this 26-24 as well, simply because I think that this coaching staff is more comfortable with the defensive side of the ball not having as much in the way of personnel because of the versatility of some of these players, such as Danico Autry being able to play inside and out on the defensive line, such as Arden Key having some of that inside-out versatility, such as Otis Reese the fourth having some of that ability to play as an edge or a stand-up linebacker. Guys like Elijah Molden, who can play cornerback or safety and be your do-it-all DB. They've got a couple of guys over there that they're comfortable moving around to different positions. And so because of that, I think that they are more comfortable with one less guy over there and one more offensive player. But it's hard. There's so much to unpack here. It's hard to even know where to begin. I want to start with the biggest surprises for me, and we can kind of talk about that with those of you that are watching live. And if you found something surprising, let us know in the chat there on Broadway Sports Media on YouTube if you're listening live. The number one thing for me, and I'd imagine it's the number one thing for most folks, the Titans only keep 3 tight ends, something that was shocking to me, something that people on Twitter were giving me a hard time for because I totally jumped to a conclusion as soon as we saw the Titans had waived Justin Rigg and Kevin Rader and Alize Mack. I figured Thomas Odukoya was locked in, that he was in on the 53-man roster. There was no way they would keep just 3 tight ends. And then like 10, 15 minutes later, they cut him as well and blew my mind. I had somebody on Twitter like 10 minutes before the show really snarkily giving me the business on, you moron. I told you all. I told you I was a very I told you so moment for this guy. I told you all along it was going to be 3. I can't believe you thought it was going to be 4. I don't understand what you even see there. It was always easy to believe they were going to keep 4. So let me quickly undress this person and anybody who thinks this same way. If you thought they'd keep 3, congrats. True. Like, here's a cookie. I'm proud of you. Well done. You predicted correctly. Like, cool. That's fine. Have your I got it right moment. I have no problem with that. But if you were predicting they'd keep just 3, I'm here to tell you there were no indicators of any kind pointing to them not keeping at least 4 tight ends. Not history, not preseason playing time, not the comments of the coaches, not the traditional play style of this team, not the way that they utilized personnel groupings in the preseason, and not the way that they played in practice all month long that I was there to watch, along with every other person in Titans media whose job it is to follow this team and make these kind of educated guesses and predictions, all of which were on the same page as I was. They're keeping 4 guys. So, like, again, if you predicted they'd keep 3, congratulations, fine. But everything, and I'm not here to say they were wrong in keeping just 3. I kind of think that they are. We'll discuss what I think they're thinking here in a moment with keeping just 3 of these guys. But in terms of making an educated guess, every traditional indicator, every reasonable indicator pointed to them keeping at least 4. And so that's why it's so surprising, because again, the way that they rolled these guys out in the preseason, it was a ton of 2 tight end sets. This guy that was giving me the business pointed to, well, if you just looked at the offensive line situation, it indicated they'd keep more linemen than tight ends. Pause. The poor offensive line situation pointed to them needing to keep more talented inline blocking tight ends. Can keeping more offensive linemen mean your bad offensive line gets better? Can you, like, if you have more of them, can you just put more than 11 guys out there on offense and just throw bodies at it? I wasn't aware that's how this works. Apparently this guy thinks that's how this works, but again, foolishness. The offensive line situation was another one of the reasons why I was expecting them to keep another inline blocking tight end like Thomas Odukoya, the strongest player on this entire roster, who showed out in multiple preseason games this year as a talented inline blocker, a guy that I thought was going to be a big part of the protection of, the defense of one Ryan Tannehill, Derrick Henry, and Tyjae Spears this year. I thought that a guy like him would be pretty important. So again, I'm flabbergasted that they didn't keep him around. And ultimately, the reason why they didn't, JT, and this is pretty obvious if you think about it, they can still use that international player's slot on him. Like Alex the Titan says here, Odukoya having the option to keep on the practice squad and not take up a spot was too convenient for them to pass up. Alex, I think you're right. I think that's ultimately what they did. My question, and again, I'm not claiming to be smarter than these coaches, but truly it's my question, and it's a question we're going to ask them when we get to talk to them this week. What was it about Thomas Odukoya's game, his development as a player, that you felt wasn't quite done? Like, clearly they think that this is a cake that's not quite baked, that they're still working on this guy, developing him. The way that they've talked about him all month has indicated they are really happy to have this guy. Mike Ribble said verbatim the other day that we lucked out. We totally lucked out. You can't ask for a better player or person to be on this team than Thomas Odukoya. Sounds like a guy you'd like to have out there on Sundays. but apparently not. So again, I'm just surprised. I'm thrown for a loop by this. And that ability, and for folks that may not understand, Odukoya being an international player that was given to the Titans, assigned to the Titans before the 2022 season, he gets to fill that international designation player slot. There's a long name for it, I'm forgetting, but there's a slot dedicated to the international players where, as long as they're not on your 53-man active roster, they don't count against the guys you can hang on to. So you can keep 16 practice squad players on your team, but you can functionally keep 17 if one of those guys is your international player. Now, as soon as they're on the roster, they count towards the 53. And so that's, I think, the opportunity the Titans had here. They feel currently that they can stash a really talented player like Odukoya and have him available at that international players spot when they decide they need him. But that just leaves Chikakonkwo, Trayvon Wesco, and Josh Weiler on this team. And so it raises some questions, JT. The number one question in my mind is, are they done? When we get to September 10th and week 1 is upon us, is it still just 3 tight ends on this team? Because as we talked about the past couple of shows, you go back and you look at the past 4 Mike Vrabel rosters, and they have all had at least 8 or more running backs plus tight ends. Running backs, fullbacks, tight ends, those 3 positions combined, it's been at least 8 of those guys on every one of his last 4 rosters, if I'm not mistaken. And so now they just have 6. What does that mean for what this offense is going to look like if truly their plan is to go in with just 6 guys? You don't have a fullback anymore. Okay, like you got to have one of these tight ends playing that fullback role, unless you're going to throw Tyjae Spears or Julius Chestnut out there to play fullback, which doesn't really make much sense. Maybe they think Chestnut can be a situational fullback. I've not seen it. I don't really think so. I'd imagine like Wesco and Chig on occasion will be that guy for you. But if you're going to be a team that operates out of 12 personnel, out of 22 personnel often, with 2 tight ends on the field, sometimes 2 tight ends and 2 running backs on the field. That's what that means, by the way. 12 personnel, 1 running back, 2 tight ends. 22 personnel, 2 running backs, 2 tight ends, for those that may not know. That's what this team, based on the depth chart they have put out, the unofficial depth chart that they've already released, it's in 12 personnel, I believe. It's either in 12 or 2. It's with 2 tight ends on the field. You've only got 3 of them. This is a team that doesn't stay that healthy all that often. So as soon as one goes down, you're really up a creek without a paddle. And last I checked, Chikakonkwo has come along as a blocker for sure, and that's been a big focus of his in the last year. But he's still not really a guy that is a big plus player as an inline blocker. You know, if you're putting out the jumbo package out there, Wesco has always been and is going to be your glorified lineman, and so like he is one of those guys you need. But on the other side of the line, who is it? Is it Josh Wiley? Is it Chikakonkwo? Wiley at 6'7", you know, he's not developed in that way yet to where you can really comfortably put him out there as an inline blocker and expect a lot from him. And again, Chig is getting better, but there's always going to be a hard ceiling, a hard limitation on a guy like Chig, who, because of his body type, is able to do such fantastic explosive things as a route runner, as a ball carrier, as a weapon in the offense. But on the other side of that coin, on the other side of that coin, I was trying to think of another thing to say. So the other side of that coin, as an inline blocker, he's just not going to be able to offer a ton at his height and weight. And so that then leads you to think, okay, well, if they are going to stick with 3 and 3, running 3 running backs, 3 tight ends on week 1, which again, I'm not sure that they're done. They may go out, and I think the tight end market may have some guys that they have scouted and they think would be worthy of bringing in to add as a 4th tight end. So I would not be shocked in the slightest if they added a 4th by September 10th. But if they don't, maybe this is an indication that, as much as, you know, I've watched the Titans for a long time. And so as they've talked this offseason about, you know, hey, JT, we're going to have this new Tim Kelly offense. It's going to be modern. It's going to be fresh. It's going to be more spread. It's going to be more pass heavy. It's going to be more modern. And like Alex Titan says here, he says, my hope with the 3 tight ends is that we see a lot more spread offense, much more 3 wide receiver, 4 wide receiver sets, probably a decent amount of 2 back sets with Spears as well. That may be the case, Alex, and you're 2 for 2 spot on today. I think that may be an indication that as much as the Titans watcher I am, trying to pump the brakes. And as much as I hear them say this, I'm still thinking, I think people may be taking it too far with their expectations. I think it may be closer to the old version than this new version people are expecting. Maybe it is closer to this big leap into a modern spread pass-heavy offense than we're thinking. And if that's the case, then having 3 and 3 at the running back and tight end position make sense. And having 7 wide receivers, which is another thing that they did that we'll discuss, also makes sense. My questions then begin. I keep question to question to question. The ultimate question, all of this boils down to is, okay, if that's what you're doing, that does raise, I think, some very valid and very significant concerns about your wide receiver core in terms of depth and right now availability. And it also raises a significant question about, okay, your offensive line, you better hope they can protect, because if they are anything like they've been the last 2 years, and JT, you and I have been on the record, we expect them to be at the very worst better than last year's group, especially as pass protectors, right? A big part of what they did when they went out and revamped this offense, you bring in Andre Dillard, who is known more for his pass blocking than his run blocking. Same thing with Daniel Brunskill. Same thing with a guy like Chris Hubbard. The same is true of a guy like Dylan Radens, who is back on the team now. We need to discuss. He has been brought. We didn't discuss that last show, did we? That's news since then. Right. So yeah, Dylan Radens, who was on the PUP physically unable to perform list with that ACL injury that he sustained either early November or late November or early December last year, was taken off of that PUP list, practiced for the first time on Monday, spoke to the media for the first time on Monday, and they are optimistic that he truly is ahead of schedule and may be able to contribute to this team sooner than later. So he is on the team, and that's big if he can contribute, even if it's by the midway point of this season for this team. He is a big, big addition to this team's depth at the tackle position. He is truly a good swing tackle. Once you get Nicholas Petit-Frere back in, having him and Chris Hubbard as your swing tackles, you're now feeling a little bit better, especially if any of these guys go down. But you got to hope that these guys can pass block as build, and I'm not sure that they can. JT, isn't that the number one concern if this becomes a pass happy offense?
Yeah, and I guess for sure, I feel like everywhere on this team right now, like as Alex Titan was saying, like with the spread offense, like the depth here is like, do they have enough to actually make this work? That's a great question to have. So not sure, especially with like keeping 3 tight ends like that. Like we've already seen, whether it was precautionary or not, like this past 2 weeks, Chigakonkwo has been out with some precautionary injuries,
hip contusion.
And what happens if Chig is out? And then of course you're down to 2 tight ends, and your pass catching option is Josh Wiley, who has shown flashes, but overall just wasn't that still exciting.
A little baby giraffe out there a little bit. It's just like, it's not, it's just very young. It's very raw. Yeah, I'm with you 100%. It's concerning.
But yeah, it is concerning. And before we move on from the tight ends here, we do have a couple comments. Something interesting that we also talked about earlier today with some people, but some questions. But with some people who do we think has the final say over
Mike
the
Vrabel.
53?
Mike Vrabel.
Mike Vrabel.
The answer is Mike Vrabel. Yeah, I mean, like, so here's the thing, and we were discussing this in the media workroom on Monday. I don't know. This is just me guessing. But just based on everything that I know, again, educated guess, I think that everybody covering this team, people that are more connected than I am. I mean, I was talking to Paul Kaharski specifically about this on Monday. And so, like, if you don't trust me with my connections to the team, trust him and his connections to the team. He's been doing this since I've been born. Mike Vrabel has the final say on this roster. And that may not be the case forever. Rand Carthen may continue to cut his teeth and prove himself in that front office, and eventually it becomes more and I'm not saying it's not a collaborative decision. It totally is. I think that they are 1A and 1B right now, but at the end of the day, when it comes down to breaking a tie, I think that it may be a coin rigged slightly in Mike Vrabel's favor. I think that he's, at least for this season with this team, and it makes some sense, right? Like Rand is new, not just to the team, but to the division. He's new to Mike Vrabel knows this team and his players better than Rand does. So I get some deference there from Rand. And that's what I'm assuming is the case, that Mike has the final say, but I don't want to oversell that. I feel like I have. It's a collaborative effort between the two. I just think that Vrabel has the tiebreaker, and it's certainly not a situation where it's a coach completely divorced of the roster building decision making situation. Sometimes you see that where a GM is a powerhouse GM like Howie Roseman. Not to say that the coach has no say up in Philadelphia, but Howie Roseman is making the final decisions on that 53-man roster. Like he's the one making those calls. That's not the case, I don't think, here in Tennessee, at least for now. Another question that I see here, D Good asking, and this is a good thing to clarify: can other teams pick off Thomas Odukoya from the Titans practice squad? So for all players in general, just to make sure everybody's on the same page here, any player that has been waived today or cut today that is not a vested veteran, which I believe is 4 years accrued in the NFL. JT, maybe fact check me on that. But guys who aren't vested veterans go to waivers. And by the way, for folks wondering where the Titans are in waivers, it's the same as the draft. So they are the 11th priority in the waivers.
You are correct. 4th year.
Okay, so 4 years accrued makes you a vested veteran. Those guys don't go to waivers. They are, as of 3 p.m. Central Standard Time today, available to sign with whatever team they so choose. So they become free agents. But the rest of the players go to the waivers, and if they make it through waivers, which means every team in the waivers says pass, I'm not going to pick this guy up, then they become free agents and they can be signed where they want. But in order for a team through waivers to pick off a guy that you cut, they can't add him to their practice squad. That player has to be added to their active 53-man roster. So you can't go shopping in the waivers for practice squad guys. You have to go shopping in the waivers for active guys on your 53-man roster. And so that's why I'm pretty confident that I'll just go ahead and say this. I don't think any of the players the Titans cut today are going to be picked off in waivers. Our buddy Zach Lyons had some numbers on this on Twitter that I don't have pulled up in front of me right now. But the other day he was talking about, I think it's something like an average of 30 players on the waivers out of 800-ish each year have been picked up by teams and added to their 53-man roster in the past couple of seasons. He went and found an average of those things. So it's a very, very low percentage of those guys, and it's only the very top-end talent that get picked off. I don't think the Titans cut anybody like that. Thomas O is not somebody that I think is going to be picked off. He can be, technically. A team can go and add him to their 53-man roster. But if they don't, he will fall back into that international player slot for the Titans at tight end. And then one more question here from Kenneth. I guess we all sweat out Thomas O and Guerra making it back to the practice squad. Yes, those two are going to be at the very top of the Titans list for practice squad guys if they make it through waivers. Again, I was very confident Odukoya makes this team. I'm going to double down. I'm extremely confident he makes this team's practice squad. There's just no way that Mike Vrabel 10 seconds ago goes on a rant at the podium about a young player in Thomas Odukoya who he named one of his offseason award winners early on in the training camp process, and then talks about how you can't find a better teammate or player for this team. Folks talking about how he's the strongest player on the team. They lucked out. Like, he's going to be on the practice squad. They're going to keep him around. Z Dean says the media team even mic'd him up during the last preseason game. You would think they wouldn't do that and then cut him 5 days later. Yeah, Z Dean, you would think that, wouldn't you? I think that this is a decision that came down to the wire. And I think that this is something that if you asked them a week ago from today, they probably would have told you they were leaning towards keeping him. And then I don't know what happened. Maybe it is the fact that they decided they wanted a 7th receiver, or maybe it is the fact that they can stash him in that international spot and it be, a bonus depth player to have at your convenience on the practice squad functionally. All right, let's move on to another position. Let's talk receiver, where we had really 2 spots up for grabs because they kept 7. We've been talking all month long about how DeAndre Hopkins, Traylon Burks, Kyle Phillips, Chris Moore, and Nick Westbrook-Ikhine were all locks for this team. I'm glad that we can quit talking about, is Nick Westbrook-Ikhine really? Yes, he's really a lock for this team. He's your wide receiver 5. Get over it. The 6th and 7th guys are Kearis Jackson, UDFA out of Georgia, and Colton Dowell, 7th round rookie out of UT Martin, here, local product. So the Titans keep 7 of those guys. And by the way, just to backtrack, did I mention, JT, that we kept all 6 of Rand's first draft class? Did I mention
Not
that?
yet, no.
Yeah, so the Titans did keep all 6 of the Titans draft picks. Rand Carthon's first draft class, all 6 of those guys remain on the active roster, plus 5 undrafted free agents also made the team. That makes 11 rookies, which is quite a few. Not quite the LA Rams out here. It's not primarily a team made out of rookies, but the first real youth infusion, youth movement we've seen from this roster in a couple of years. They've been, for a couple seasons in a row now, the Ben Jones of the world, the Taylor Lewans of the world have really bogged down their average age, and they've been one of the more elderly teams in the league. This Titans team is a much healthier mix of young talent and veteran talent. And so I think that's a good thing overall. Is it maybe indicative of this is truly a transition year for the Titans, and maybe there is more of a hard ceiling on them than the past couple of teams? Maybe. We've considered that as a possibility. And so we'll see on that front. There may be some real rookie mistakes you see, especially in the first half of the season, where you just have to write that off as young guys got to cut his teeth somehow. But having that youth movement is a good thing for the long-term growth and health of this team. But keeping those two receivers, and if you're watching with us on Broadway Sports Media YouTube page, the live stream of this show, let me know in the comments what you thought about them keeping Kearis Jackson and Colton Dowell. The obvious snub here, and in the past really like 72 hours is when I finally came around to, I'm kind of thinking they're not keeping him. And I've been saying it for weeks and weeks that Reggie Roberson Jr. was going to make this team, that I thought he was the sixth receiver. And for the longest time in camp, truly he was. JT, no player on this team was more negatively impacted, more hurt by Will Levis getting injured for the last 10-ish days of camp, missing the last 2 preseason games entirely, and giving all of that work to Malik Willis. No player was more hurt than Levis himself, than Reggie Roberson Jr., the receiver who he had developed a really nice connection with at camp. Those two in particular were finding plays to make in the first 3-ish weeks of camp, where every single day you'd see at least 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 Reggie Roberson plays that were made that made you think, oh yeah, this guy's clearly this, like, of the riffraff at the bottom of this receiving core, he's the guy differentiating himself. He's the guy earning a spot. And it really came at the worst possible time for the guy that was targeting him the most, and Will Levis. And this is not like conspiratorial, like Reggie Roberson would have made it if Levis stuck around. I think that he would have, maybe not. But certainly there's a hard correlation between Reggie Roberson showing out at practice, Will Levis getting hurt, not practicing much and not playing in preseason games, and then in the last week and a half-ish, Reggie Roberson Jr. falling off the face of the planet, being non-existent. And so he's certainly a prime practice squad candidate for sure, but a disappointing turn of events for him. Instead, Kearis Jackson, the rookie out of Georgia, gets his spot, as well as Colton Dowell. I'm glad Colton gets to stay on the roster. Not that I was worried he was going to be picked off in the waivers, but I think that he's somebody that it wouldn't shock me if he was able to contribute something by the end of the year for this Titans team. He's super raw. He continues to develop, but all of the requisite tools, all the things you need, he's got, man. Like, there's a reason they drafted him and took a shot on him in the 7th round. He is a toolsy, raw athlete. He is a built-in-a-lab wide receiver. They've just got to try to harness that with him. He's kind of like Racing McMath in that way, who also got cut, but not, at the beginning of his experiment, not at the end, which Racy clearly is, I think, at the end of his experiment. Just an athlete they never quite could turn into a great football player. And so he gets cut, and I wouldn't be shocked if he misses out on the practice squad. Maybe he makes it, but he's somebody that I think his future is in serious question with the Titans at the very least. With Dowell, I don't know, JT. Do you think it's crazy to say, folks in the comments, do you think it's crazy to say he probably won't be doing much of anything to start the season, but in relief, if needed, he may be able to contribute by the end of the year?
I mean, maybe, right? Like, he definitely is the wide receiver 7. I think Kearis Jackson has definitely showed a lot more throughout the preseason than Colton Dowell kind of has. And that's why ultimately Kearis Jackson made this roster. Like, he's made plays that you would expect from like a wide receiver, even like 4, like on this team, like a Chris Moore on this team. And hopefully that's going to translate over. Colton Dowell, like you said, more of a prospect, but as he is on this roster and as he gets like some games under his belt, it's not crazy to think that he can come in and kind of produce, especially if this wide receiver core gets banged up. And yeah, we have some comments. I mean, Pretty Boy Lipschitz, who is joining us now, says Dowell was the surprise for him. He said he believed that Dowell has probably dropped more passes in practice than anyone else. And then as well,
it's funny that, I mean, like, I agree a lot with your sentiment, and I appreciate your support for Lipschitz. How can you say that when you've not been at practice? Like, maybe you're just going based off of reports. From my vantage point, I disagree more than anybody else, because frankly, Kyrus Jackson definitely dropped more passes than Dowell has. Gavin Holmes definitely dropped more passes. You could argue that, like, Nick Westbrook-Akine, frankly, has dropped as many passes as Colton Dowell has. On the front end of practice, definitely was the case that he was dropping a ton. On the he trended positively throughout August, and so that's a good thing to get on a roster. Like, that's what you need to do, and he did. I will say this, and to your credit, pretty boy, I think I said this the other day, and it remains true. Dowell is at the point in his development where if he gets an open look, a pass in his vicinity that is not contested, he's going to catch the ball and he's going to be a yak threat. But he has hit that wall of, if it's a contested catch, the boy ain't coming down with the ball. Like, it's really concerning if the catch is contested, even in the slightest, it's bouncing off of his hands, and it's there, and he's got the hand, like, he's got the eye tracking, he's got the physical tool, like the physical coordination to like get up and be in the right position. It's literally just step 10 in the process of making the catch. Clamp hands on ball he's struggling with that right now, because it's all there and it's going right through his hands or right off his hands or right off his helmet or whatever it may be. So, like, that is certainly the next big thing for him in his development. And so, like, I agree with you there. He's dropped a lot. But if you watched the third preseason game, the Titans versus the Patriots, was easily his best performance. And that game, I think, showed flashes of, this is what this guy is turning into. If you compare this to, like, day one, it is so night and day for this player. And if he continues to trend on this curve, he may be able to produce for you. Kyrus Jackson is a guy that they added who, JT, did you have something else to say on
well,
Dowell?
I was just going to say, yeah, because we are currently having a Colton Dowell versus NWI debate in the chat right now. We have a couple things to say here. As Z Dean says, Dowell is a younger NWI with a higher ceiling, ...
higher ceiling.
Maybe.
Yes.
And then friend of the show.
Simply because we know what NWI's ceiling is now. Like, it's established. He is a wide receiver 5.
We don't know.
Dowell, we don't know. That's the only reason why. Yeah.
And then friend of the show, James Foster from A to Z's Film Room, comes in here and says, Dowell clears NWI as a route runner right now for whatever it's worth. So
no, I agree. And James, I mean, he's got a much keener eye for that than I. So I'm glad that he agrees. But you can see that with really the layman's eye at practice. I'd say that NWI is a more developed contested catch player, but that is one is very terrible and one is bad. Neither is very good at it right now. I think Dowell can get better at it as he progresses. And so I think the Titans' general philosophy with Dowell, the reason they drafted him in the first place, pretty clearly, is he is your Nick Westbrook-Akine replacement. Like that, he has been brought in to take Nick's job in particular. So if things go well with him this year, I would expect this is probably the last we see of Nick Westbrook-Akine, unless he somehow has a late career jump of sorts. James says in the comments, I could probably find 2 or 3 plays from last year where NWI got open versus man coverage. Yeah, the separation ability for NWI really lacking. James, I don't know if you agree with this or not, but just as an athlete, I mean, Dowell has NWI kind of cooked in that regard. At least out on the practice field, he seems to have much more juice than NWI has. So again, I think the ceiling is much higher there.
Yeah, and then finishing this, Logan Grady has 2 points where he says NWI has had brick hands in NFL games, so coaches aren't really concerned about the drops. And then a good point, if we do see Dowell like early in the season, that means injuries kill the Titans once again. So like,
you don't want to. Yeah, you don't want to.
An indication of right now that as we talk about how NWI or Colton Dowell is miles ahead of NWI. Well, no. It's just like he could be, but like right now, like if we do see Colton Dowell in a game, then that means that the Titans wide receiver room is worse for wear. And then as we get on to Kyrus Jackson here, to segue over, Logan also says Jackson is great because it gets you a returner that you won't be screwed by if he gets hurt. Yeah,
absolutely. He is what you needed so that you didn't have Kyle Phillips out there in the freaking preseason returning punts and being put in a situation that they shouldn't be. Like, my thinking on this has shifted entirely in the last 8 months from Kyle Phillips, he's a good punt returner, you got to put him out there, to Kyle Phillips, he's a good punt returner, don't put him out there. If he's going to be one of your, what other team in the league has one of their top 3 starting wide receivers as their primary punt returner? Like, that's not a occupational risk that other teams expose one of their top 3 starting receiver talents to on a regular basis. But the Titans have been doing that in the preseason of all times, and it got him hurt, and it's the reason why you're not going to see him for a couple of weeks, and that's really frustrating, I think, for anybody, especially for especially for Kyle himself. I know that he's very frustrated about it, and so Kearis Jackson being on this team, and you saw the writing was on the wall in that 3rd preseason game. They are running him out there to return every kick and every punt, literally burning a timeout to make sure he's the guy in there and not somebody else at the end of the game. Like, we want to get him as many reps at this as possible. If we're going to keep him around and make him our return guy and a depth receiver, we need to make sure he can do this. And to his credit, wasn't super explosive after making the catch, but reliably caught the ball and made a move or two and picked up a yard or two. Like, bare minimum, you got check marks across the board. So good for Kearis Jackson. He's also a talented player that has made some plays in the preseason in front of everybody, and has also made some plays behind the scenes at practice that we have talked about and reported on. He's one of those guys that if I were to look at these 2 rookies in Kearis Jackson and Colton Dowell and be like, who's got more Butterfingers right now? It is Jackson. With Dowell, you'd see him, streaking across the middle of the field wide open, and if the ball hits him, he was catching the ball. With Kearis, he's demonstrated some more contested catch ability, which is a plus, but he's also demonstrated some ability to just drop inexplicably some wide open passes that hit him right on the hands. Some classic, like, turning to run and look before you look the ball into your hand situation. Just some like real rookie mistake stuff there. And that's going to reps are required, I think, for him to get up to speed and have a better catchability than he currently has. So he's another guy you don't want to see out there all that soon. If we don't have any more comments on the receiving core,
we have 2 more here.
2 more? Okay.
James also chiming in again saying Dowell was more of the Racey McMath replacement in his opinion, and Josh Wiley is an NWI replacement, which is an interesting idea. And then Logan saying, ideally, NWI Dowell and I have similar snap counts this season.
So I'm interested in why James said that, and I'm gonna, like, again, I trust his scheme evaluation more than my own because this is what he does. So I'm going to talk. I don't want to make this whole show about a DM between me and James on the show. I'll talk to him about that more later. But James says Racing McMath athletic project. Yes, like on those simple terms, athletic project types. That is what I see what you're saying. That is what Colton Dowell is, and that is what Racing McMath was. And so, yeah, I get that comparison. I think in terms of the way that they're utilized on the field, however, I personally see more of them in the way that they've utilized Dowell in practice, like taking some of those NWI snaps. He's a big-bodied receiver who's athletic, can be used inside and out. NWI plays a lot of snaps and does nothing, says James. True. In that sense, that's not what you want Colton Dowell to become. But let's move on to the offensive line. And they kept 10 of these suckers, which they've got 2 full offensive lines now. They can, first team, second team, I suppose. They keep the obvious ones, the starting 5, and Andre Dillard, Peter Skoronski, Aaron Brewer, Daniel Brunskill, and Chris Hubbard. That 6th lock, of course, Dylan Radins, as he came off of the PUP list on Monday. And then 4 new guys that weren't quite locks, but they make the cut. You've got stalwart veteran Corey Levin, who is your of these guys. He is your swing interior lineman. He is your stalwart. You need a center, he'll play center. You need a guard, he'll play guard. And it's going to be mediocre, but it's not going to be horrendous. And so you feel safe in that regard. So good for Corey making the team. He beats out a guy like Jordan Roos, who didn't quite make the cut and is probably a practice squad candidate. And you got a couple of swing tackle types. Jalen Duncan, the Titans' 6th round pick out of Maryland, very much a project. They hang on to him, as I think we were expecting them to. They're going to continue to try to develop him into a future tackle for this team. We'll see if that happens. He's got a lot to work on. Xavier Newman-Johnson, he's got some inside-out ability, but primarily, I believe, if you total it all up this offseason in practice and in preseason, they played him outside more than in, and so he's going to be a swing guy in that way. And then Justin Murray, who we've been talking about as a guy who, frankly, I feel like, and a number of folks in the media who watched this, and if James is still around, you've watched the film. I'm curious, James, if you agree with this. I want to see him compete for that right tackle job. I'm not saying he's great by any stretch of the imagination. I am saying that Chris Hubbard also not great by any stretch of the imagination. And from what we saw from Justin Murray, again, against some lesser talent later on in preseason games, he was really good in the preseason. He was really solid, especially as a pass protector. I wonder if there, and Mike Vrabel himself said on Monday when we asked, Chris Hubbard, he is the starting right tackle for this team right now. That's official. But there's still room for that competition to be held and for him to lose that job to somebody else if they were to claim it from him. And he named Justin Murray by name. He brought him up in particular as somebody that can push for that job. So I'm curious if they will get, I'd say if we see, but we've reached the point of practice, unfortunately, where it's useless and we won't see any team period in the media. They kick us out as they start to install actual offense. I'm curious if we hear that he's getting some more play in practice with the first team at the right tackle position. I also would not rule out, again, this is not anytime soon. Pump the brakes. If you think that if you think that Dylan Radin's coming back now indicates he's going to be ready soon, I would pump the brakes on that a little bit. If by soon you mean you were thinking he may not be ready to go all year, and now you're like maybe by midseason, sure. That definition of soon, maybe. He seems to be very ahead of schedule. But he did tear his ACL at the end of November, beginning of December last year, very late in this. I'm pretty sure it was December last year, very late in the season. He is very much ahead of the injury analytics schedule. He's a young guy, and everybody's body is different. But I'd be shocked if that knee. I mean, he practiced on it for the first time against somebody that's not a trainer wearing a pad suit on Monday. That was the first time he'd ever done that. So, like, there's a long road still ahead for him. I'd be shocked to see him in any capacity as a game day available player before, like, mid-October probably would be the earliest that I would say. Maybe medical journals are writing about him as the latest miracle in ACL recovery, and we see him earlier than that. But unless it's truly miraculous in that way, I think that he will be rehabbing for now. But JT, all of that being said, on the back end of the season, he could push for that job. Listen, Nicholas Petit-Frere, we saw him play some in the preseason. Wasn't exactly inspiring. Wasn't exactly like, oh, can't wait till we get that guy back. That's a situation where you're hoping that what he showed us in the preseason was not his best, because if that's his best, then he's going to regress and he's not going to be like, you may need to stick with Chris Hubbard over him. I don't think that's going to be the case, but it does bring up that question. Some questions I've seen in the comments on Dylan Radin's, Logan asking, why take him off of PUP then? Which is a fair question. He was on the PUP list. You could have left him on the PUP list, would not have counted against the 53-man roster. He would have been ineligible to play for the first 4 weeks of the season. But, the argument, I suppose, he's saying that if I'm right and he's not going to be ready to go in the first 4 weeks, why take him off? Logan, I don't know. Maybe they think that there's, it's one of two things, right? Either they think there's a chance he is a medical miracle and he's going to be like maybe by week 4, by the end of the first week of October, I think is week 4, if I'm not mistaken. He's going to be available then. That's sort of on my timeline. So maybe they want to have who they think is their. I would not be shocked if they think he's their highest quality by a landslide swing tackle. They want to have him available as soon as possible. Maybe it's a fear thing or a desperation thing where they're like, listen, I don't care. We need to have this guy back. And even if he's not 100%, we need to have him ready by whenever we need him, because there's a chance that we are tackleless and naked and afraid, and he is our only hope. So that's my best guess. It's a good question, Logan, and we'll ask later this week when we talk to the media, or when the media gets to talk to the coaches, that is. Logan says, I agree with you that there's no way he plays by week 4, so it's odd to bring him back. Yeah, that's certainly something we'll bring up. Z Dean saying Titans need to cut Murray and claim Tyree Phillips from the Giants. Yeah, this is a player that I wanted to bring up, and now is as good a time as any. Tyree Phillips, a tackle cut by the Giants. JT, pull up. I don't know his numbers or his year, but I heard from some folks on Twitter that I trust that he's somebody that is absolutely on the list of players that folks should be, teams around the league that are tackle needy should be paying attention to. And so I'm willing to go based on their word that, yeah, the Titans should have some interest in him. But JT will have those numbers in a second. And A Vining says, does this team practice anymore this week? Yes, they will practice on Wednesday and Thursday, I believe, and we'll be there for those practices for as much as we can see. JT, what's the story on Tyree?
Yeah, so he's a 2020 draft guy. So he was a third round selection,
Okay.
I believe, by the Baltimore Ravens. So he's bounced around a little bit since then. But last season, fine. He played 365 offensive snaps, allowed 3 sacks, had 4 penalties. Overall, PFF wise, he was just a 50.5 graded player last year. His pass blocking 55 PFF grade, and then run blocking 53. Played most of his snaps though last season at right tackle. So like none of those are really like jumping off the page. Like 365 snaps played, total pressures allowed 16. Like not crazy, right? But
the argument is
he's just
healthy,
as good,
as good as Chris Hubbard and Justin Murray, and maybe of note, significantly younger than them. Chris Hubbard is 32 years old. This guy, you said, is a 2020 draft pick.
Yeah, he's 26 and a half. So.
Yeah, so like that's the argument is if you can just have Chris Hubbard as healthy, I mean, not to say Chris Hubbard isn't healthy, but healthy Chris Hubbard, and then slash 6 years of their life, 6 years worth of wear on those tires. Maybe you kick that tire. Maybe you see right, maybe you see what's going on. Pretty Boy Lipshit saying 50 is not good. No, it is not. But if my memory serves me, I think Chris Hubbard is hanging in the low 60s.
Let me see.
In terms of PFF grades, like it's around the same area. And with Hubbard, like what the ceiling is now. He's on the decline. With a guy like Tyree, you can maybe at least make the argument that there's still maybe some juice to be squeezed.
I mean, like last year, Chris Hubbard, he's 32 years old. I mean, he only played 39 snaps last season. But
not a good sample size.
But when he did, his overall PFF was 40.9 with a 22.7 pass
so
blocking.
There's the argument right there,
and
boys
a
and girls.
53.4 run blocking. He allowed 2 pressures and 1 sack on 39 offensive snaps played. So like in like a actual
if you trust PFF
with both of them, like just looking at it, like if he played the whole season and like by those numbers, he probably ends up being worse than Tyree.
Yeah. So there's the argument. Like Tyree, not great, but everything's relative. Better than what you got. But in Titans adjacent news, Pretty Boy Lipshit's doing the journalism we all need. Dennis Daly, everybody's favorite tackle, has in fact made the Cardinals. The tank is on. Love what they're doing down there. Just bold-faced, unashamed, unabashed tanking.
Josh Dobbs or Clayton Tune for week 1.
Toon Squad, baby. Toon Squad. Yeah, I'm with
Make Stoney happy.
Okay, is that everything on the offensive line we want to talk about? I think
mostly.
Let's move to the defense here.
The only other questions that were comments that were really of note is basically on the defensive side of the ball here, with a lot of surprises there.
Let's look there, and let me get back to my list here of things that I'm surprised by. Another thing that I had written down as biggest surprises, and I think everyone was surprised by this, a guy that we thought was close to a lock is strong, but like certainly a favorite to make this team. Eric Garror, the undersized cornerback, cut by the Titans, absolutely going to be on the practice squad, assuming he makes it through waivers. They really liked him, but they go with Anthony Kendall, the more outside, lengthy, rangy type, not the undersized interior player that Garror was more built to be, which is interesting, JT. So the cornerback room is the 4 locks that we expected in Christian Fulton, Sean Murphy-Bunting, Roger McCreary, and Trey Avery. Anthony Kendall rounds out that group as the 5th. No Eric Garror. He was going to be more that, like I said, smaller inside guy. With Kendall, it's not. I'm not going to say that he can't play on the inside, but he's built and is more comfortable from what I've seen playing on the outside. But with Christian Fulton, he's obviously an outside cornerback. Sean Murphy-Bunting has talked to us at length about how he's much more, he prefers to play outside. He feels he's more comfortable outside. He feels he's better outside, but he's absolutely willing and able and confident in his ability to play inside. So he's got some inside-outside versatility, but leans outside. Roger McCreary did better last year on the outside than he did on the inside. In college, played as an outside player, even though he doesn't have quite the length that you'd want from an outside guy. He was better last year statistically outside than in, Maybe they're planning on just a hard switch for him. Sorry, buddy, you're moving inside. Figure it out. You can do it. We believe in you. But I don't really know that's the case. And then Trey Avery, also kind of an inside-outside guy, but not a clear inside guy. The only clear inside guy you have on this team is the hybrid defensive back in Elijah Molden. He is coming out of the draft, I think that his nickname out of Washington was the Jedi of the slot, which is something they talked about on draft day. So, like, he is your slot dude. But all indications are he's going to be a safety this year. Like, they'll use him at both positions. And, if you're using him as a slot, corner, a nickel safety, fine, or whatever, that works as well. But Anthony Kendall, like in the cornerback room, Fulton, Murphy, Bunting, McCreary, Avery, Kendall, you don't have a clear slot cornerback. Kind of strange, right?
I mean, yeah, like I think most of these guys are just like this. Like, I don't know. Like, I'm trying to
exactly.
I'm trying to think of like, it probably is just more like, what is new secondaries coach Chris Harris building in there?
What is he building in there?
I think he's just gonna yell and hype them all up to like believe in themselves to play that they can play both sides. So like, yeah, maybe I don't know.
Listen, if anyone can do it, it's Chris Harris.
Yeah. But I mean, a couple questions here in the chat, I guess, just from reaction. Pretty Boy saying, my take is that Kendall is a special teams piece more than anything.
Well, he's the fifth cornerback, so yes, that's the case. And then, but Garrett was fantastic on special teams too. They were talked about in the same breath a lot of times in the press conferences with Mike Vrabel after. Hey, what'd you think from the young DBs tonight on special teams? Oh man, guys like Eric Garrett, guys like Anthony Kendall, guys like Shaheem Carter, like we've been Matthew Jackson. Those are the four guys that he would bring up a couple of times in the past couple of weeks is like special teams aces. I'm proud of them. I'm excited about what they can do. So I think they both could have done that.
And then Logan says, if Molden was a better athlete, he would be so good. That guy sees the field. I think he was trying to say great.
Brute.
Yeah. So that, and then brute. Also Garrett and Trey Avery, he says overlap too much in his opinion.
I don't know if I agree with that.
I don't know if I agree with that either, but like,
Anthony Kendall and the rest of the cornerback room also overlap. So, like, maybe there's some overlap between Avery and Garrett, but I'm confused by how Anthony Kendall isn't also significant overlap. Let's touch on the safeties before we move on. The three locks, of course, Kevin Byard, Amani Hooker, Elijah Molden on the team. Fourth and fifth guys are Matthew Jackson, and Mike Brown. Mike Brown was the closest thing, I think, on this team to a lock that wasn't a lock. And so not shocked that he's on this team. He's going to be a really nice fourth guy that can come off the bench situationally, rotationally. And then Matt Jackson, not shocked by this one. Paul Kaharski, credit to him. He's been zeroing in on Matt Jackson. He's kind of the guy that convinced me Matthew was going to be on this team because of the way that the Titans brass has been talked about him and because of the way they've kind of sneaky been using him a ton in practice and on the field in the preseason as a gunner. They've been really fond of what he's been doing on the special team side of the ball. So he's your special teams safety 5 for sure. Cutting guys like Tyreek Jones, Shaheem Carter, and Josh Thompson. I think Shaheem Carter is your candidate there to make the practice squad. By the way, guys that were cut on the cornerback side, Eric Garrett, Alonzo Davis, LJ Davis, Stephen Jones Jr., and Armani Marsh. I think that Armani Marsh and Eric Garrett are the two that you earmark as practice squad favorites there. If you don't have any more questions from the live, you want to talk about the linebackers because this was another big surprise for folks.
Yeah, and that's where most of our comments of note still are from, especially saying from, I think that's Glacius. I think
Glacius.
Glacius says surprised they cut Chance Campbell and keep Monty Rice. Also surprised he said cutting Garrett and keeping Anthony Kendall, like we just said. Yeah. So yeah, we can talk about that. And then Logan also said Campbell was the surprising cut to me, but overall, I don't think the Titans got rid of anyone special.
So at the linebacker position, they keep 5 guys. The locks were Azeez Al-Shaair and Jackie Gibbons. They keep 3 more. As we've been down to the wire, it felt like, man, maybe Monty Rice truly isn't on this team. Maybe my predictions were right all along, but this was my hot take 3 weeks ago when I made my first 53-man roster prediction that he'd not make it. He made it, but should he have? I don't know. We don't know. Like he's been unavailable, and we don't know the nature of his injury, I don't believe. And so whether or not he can contribute to this team, we will see. I think that he maybe got in just by dearth of we want a 5th guy. We're not super jazzed by Ben Neiman or Chance Campbell, although I was more enamored by their ability than they were apparently. And so we just, coin flip, the tiebreaker goes to Monty Rice. Let's keep him on the roster because we spent a 3rd-round pick on him. We think he has some tools that we still want to develop. I don't know. Like, I'm saying this all in a questioning tone because I have some serious questions as to whether or not Monty Rice can really be worth his roster spot that he's taking up. Luke Gifford, they traded for, I always forget, Bears or Cowboys? Cowboys, right? They traded for him from the Cowboys?
Free agent from the Cowboys.
Yeah, okay, so free agent signed from the Cowboys. Luke Gifford is one of your linebackers that you keep. He's absolutely a special teams ace, so he's going to be a big part. He's going to play a big part there. And then maybe the biggest surprise linebacker, not maybe, definitely the biggest surprise linebacker addition, Otis Reese IV, as Mike Vrabel said, OTIS. We should have known he was a potential maker of this team when 3 weeks ago, we heard Mike Vrabel asked about Otis Reese kind of out of nowhere, and he lights up unprompted and is like, OTIS. I cannot wait to see that guy play. Whoa, Mike. All right. That caught my attention at the time. Was surprised by that. Like, I guess I need to add Otis Reese IV to my list of guys to watch. And he was fine out there. He didn't really do a ton in the preseason that really jumped off the screen and caught your attention, but apparently they are fond of him, and maybe he's just the latest Dr. Gibby. It seems like Mike Vrabel loves to fall in love with a fringe linebacker, and he sees something in him that we don't, and maybe he's the next guy that they bring back there. Good news for, I know if anyone watches a football show, by the way, here on the 440 Network, I know that Braden Gall and I think Zach Lyons was the one that coined the Crackerbacks. He was referring to the Titans linebacker group as the Crackerbacks because it was Azeez Al-Shaair and a bunch of white guys, which is if you are familiar with NFL lore of late, that is a classic Josh Allen milk check all day, every day. Scary proposition for your team. You get another non-white guy in there in Monty Rice, whether he sees the field or not, we'll see. But the Crackerback moniker for this group doesn't ring quite as true now that Ben Neiman and Chance Campbell have been cut. I think Neiman and Campbell are both good candidates for the practice squad. I'd expect at least one, if not both of them on that practice squad. Pretty Will Lipschitz saying that players with nicknames or locks we should have known. This is true. I think it's fair to say if Vrabel gives you a strong nickname of any sort, that you are in good shape to make the team. Logan asking, is Rice really worse than Gibbons? I don't know. Sorry, I'm thinking about Campbell. Gibbons, then Jack Gibbons. Yes, he is right now. Yeah, he is worse than Jack Gibbons. Yes, at practice, it's very clear. Like, and that's not to say that Gibbons has been lighting it up, but he's been consistent. He's been reliable. Monty Rice has really been up and down, and the inconsistency, I think, rubs the Titans the wrong way. Not enough to make him not on the team, but enough to have him a little bit in the doghouse right now, as well as injured. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if we don't see much of him at all this season. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he turns it around. Two more positions to talk about, and it's the defensive front, the defensive linemen and the edge players. Let's start with the linemen. You got the three locks. No surprise here. Jeffrey Simmons, Teair Tart, and Danico Autry all make the team. The other guy that I think was the closest thing to a lock on this roster without technically being one, Jaden Peavy is your defensive lineman 5, made a really big jump. His coaches have been really fond of the work that he's done to become a more versatile player, as both a run stuffer and a classic nose tackle, as well as now adding some pass rush ability. He's kind of your Teair Tart light. He is doing the same thing, kind of on the same development track, but at a 80-85% talent differential, like 80 to 85% of what Teair Tart is. He's also younger, so we could see him be, on that same track and just a year behind. I think that he's poised to potentially have a really nice season for the Titans, kind of a breakout. Like, ooh, at the end of the year, you're looking at the stat sheet. Jaden Peavy with 4.5 sacks on the year. Jaden Peavy with 6 sacks. Where'd this come? Jaden Peavy with an 89 at PFF grade as a run blocker. Who is this guy? What's he doing? Wouldn't shock me at all if he had that kind of year. And then Naquan Jones was a surprise as your 5th defensive lineman. They cut the rest of them. They said, Naquan, give us Naquan. Everybody else, Tyler Shelvin, TK McClendon Jr., Jaleel Johnson, Michael Dwumfor, Kyle Pecco, Rip, Mike Herndon, and Trayvon Coley all kicked to the curb for Naquan Jones as the sole survivor as that 5th defensive lineman. Naquan he doesn't really, he's the safe pick. He's the known quantity, the known commodity in the eyes of the Titans. So I get it from that perspective, but overall, it's interesting that they kept him instead of any of those other guys. I would have thought that Jaleel Johnson or Michael Dwumfor would really push for that fifth role. Apparently not, JT.
Yeah, I mean, I saw a lot this week. So many people just like the Dwumfor Ford. Sorry, his name is so
got
hard to
hot
say.
there
It got
at the
very,
end, though.
but still, it
Yeah.
got super hot. And I think it's just because people were like, his PFF numbers in preseason are insane. And I was like, what are we doing here?
PFF
Like,
preseason PFF numbers don't mean anything.
like,
it's tiny sample sizes. Stop.
Yeah, like that was the whole thing. They're like, he is a beast with his
He
PFF
looked
numbers
good.
in the preseason.
Don't get me
Like,
wrong.
he looked
He looked
good,
good,
but like,
but
I mean, this is the like most classic like Titans taking the known commodity here because he has been around. We haven't like I expected fully like for some of these other positions like to feel more of that vibe, and I think we did, but like not as much as
the only one where I'm like,
yeah,
that's a lame.
that's
safe.
That's
and lame.
That's what I agree with too here. But then Logan says how many weeks of Murphy being inactive on game day until fans riot like he's Deacon Jones?
2, maybe 3. Let's talk about that. That's a perfect transition to the edge position. We got 4 of those guys kept on the team, kind of thin there, but you have some versatility. Nico Autry can play the edge. I think they're not afraid to have Otis Reese play the edge if necessary. The obvious guys were Arden Key, Harold Landry, and Rashad Weaver. All of those guys, of course, on the team. Then your 4th, Titans fans everywhere rejoice. Their favorite pass rush king, sack creator, Caleb Murphy, Division II record holder for sacks in a single season. He makes the team. He beats out Sam O, Zach McLeod, and Thomas Rush for that last spot, which I'm glad. I think people misunderstood me in recent episodes. I probably should have been more clear. I was not anti-Caleb Murphy or anti-Caleb Murphy making this team. I just kept talking about how I kept saying prepare yourself for not to make the team, not because I thought he shouldn't, but because maybe this is me being too cynical. All of the indicators, as we talked about with the tight end position, were pointing to this guy not making the team. Every single time he was brought up in press conferences to Mike Vrabel, he immediately downplayed the hype around Murphy or immediately made it about, well, that whole group, they're just playing it as a team. And there's a lot of work to be like very much deflecting and downplaying of Murphy. And anything he said specific about Murphy often was, well, he's a creator back there and he gets after the quarterback and that's good and all. But like, we need a guy that's going to be at the back end of any position group to contribute on special teams. And like, we need him to continue to carve out a role on special teams. And so them adding him to this roster truly is a pretty astonishing leap of faith, a statement on the Titans' part, because they are not adding him because of his special teams prowess. They're not adding him hoping he can become an adequate special teamer like that. You can't do that. So they're adding him truly because they think his ability to get after the quarterback is valuable enough for them to keep him on this roster, even as the last edge player, maybe the number 9 overall defensive lineman, the bottom of the barrel where you should be on special teams as a regular, reliable player. He hasn't proven the ability to do that. Maybe he will, but they're taking a gamble on him as a pass rusher, which good for them. I'm glad. Like, this is the kind of gamble you should be taking as a team in a guy like Caleb Murphy, who may truly have, like, if you can get 3 or 4 or 5 sacks out of him this year in very, like, I think he only played, he played very few snaps this preseason to have gotten 4 sacks rather on the entire 3-game series. If you can get him like 4 sacks this season on 100 snaps played, then cool. You know what I mean? Like, as a rotational and relief player, if you can get some sack production, some even better, some pass rush pressure, some pressure stats, some hurry stats, like, that is a good reason to keep him around. And I think that's the experiment they're going to be going about with him. And so that's the Titans roster, folks. That's all 53 of them. JT, do you have any more comments from the peanut gallery before we get on to some news with producer JT?
Yeah, we can. There's just, I think, 1 or 2 more here. Just wanted to
Paul,
point this out here. Paul coming in a little bit late, one of the horsemen of the Hot Read Apocalypse, saying, Dowell doubters, beware. He's going to develop. I discovered him in my investigation draft process while at UT Martin. And I did want to just call that out to give him what is deserved. He actually, like, when Colton Dowell was drafted, Paul was like, this dude, I know this dude. Like, I watched this dude play. He's good. So, like, have to give him shout outs here for that he was on it first, and then of
Paul
course
discovered Colton
yes.
Dowell is basically what we're saying. Like
It
Paul
is what we
created
are
Colton
saying.
Dowell. Yeah.
So and then Logan just coming back in here with another game of higher or lower, which is higher Murphy's games played or preseason sacks. I mean,
games played, like at least one snap in a game, higher on games played. But like it's gonna be a lot of 3 snaps, 5 snaps,
Yeah.
whatever it may be. Special team snaps probably. So that's kind of an out there. All right. Let's get to the news with producer JT. And JT, off the top, we have some breaking news. I don't know if you saw this. Some more news out of Houston. Do we have that?
I did. Yeah.
Okay, so I won't ruin it. I just want to make sure we have that in there. All right.
I already
Without
got it
further
locked
ado,
in, so
producer
we're good.
JT with the news.
Yeah, before we get to that Texans news, let's talk just a little bit more Titans here. Just kind of pointing out that, hey, yesterday, Treylon Burks, he's back, baby. And
he's back.
Boy,
he's
did
back,
he do it. Did
back,
he do it in a very amazing way? Like Air Burks
bold fashion
is
bold.
Now that's the word I was going for, but Air Burks might as well just make a shoe brand now, because that catch yesterday was pretty phenomenal.
Listen, we talked to him in the locker room before we got out there for practice. We were grilling him, trying to get him to slate. He was very coy about it. Just like, no timeline, God's plan. Like, I'm just trying to get better, get back, help my team. We're like, okay, well, maybe we'll see him next week after. And then we turn around and there he is at practice. We just had this conversation, Treylon, you sly dog.
Yeah, but he looked impressive. Still, we're not saying that he will play week 1. Like this very much still might be him coming back and being able to practice, but not at full speed, even though he did look really impressive yesterday. But like,
if you saw that jumping catch, by the way, the leg he lands on and twists on is the injured knee.
Yes.
So he full body weight and torque on that injured LCL and no issues. So that's got to be really promising.
But it's going in a good direction. But one other wide receiver here that
real quick on Treylon. And sorry, I just want to point this out. And so our buddy Sam Phelan, friend of the show, I guess he's a doctor because he was telling me, but I fact checked him on this yesterday, and it is true. He pointed out how like an LCL injury is exactly the type of injury that you have to keep moving. You have to keep it active as it recovers gently, because it's one of those things that if you just give it full rest, bed rest style rest, brace style rest, heavy brace, that is mechanical brace, it's going to get tight and it's going to set you back further than like it's a tenuous process. You have to kind of ease it back. And so it was surprising to me that he was out there, not just out there, but without a brace on of any kind, no sleeve or anything, no additional support, which is good news, a surprising development. But it is an injury where like we did see he was probably overall yesterday was probably going about 70-80%, like was not pushing it with the explosiveness. The only time we really saw him do anything risky with any torque was that one-handed catch where he landed on that leg. I'd imagine it wasn't his plan. It just kind of was natural. And his coaches probably, the trainers may have held their breath in that moment. Like, what are you doing? But he seemed to be okay out there. And I was texting you during the day as well as some others. And it was like, what are the odds Treylon plays week 1? And I was talking to him in the locker, or before I went to talk to him in the locker room, I was like, I'd say 50-50 right now. And then after I talked to him in the locker room, I was like 65-35. And then I see him come out for practice with a helmet on. I go, maybe 75-25. And then I see him do all that in the drills. And I'm like, okay, like 80-20, 85-15. Like it's in 1 hour, things dramatically changed for what I'm expecting from Treylon Burks. I'd say for sure week 1, wouldn't say that. For sure, like by week 3, yes. And if you asked me, does he play week 2? I'm very confident he plays week 2. But I think overall, you're very likely to see him in week 2. Definitely going to see him by week 3. And you may even get to see him in limited capacity in that opening week game against New Orleans. Now, JT, the other side of the coin here, another injured receiver, not as good of a report on.
Yeah. Kyle Phillips right now with that knee injury. When you got to talk to him this week, didn't sound like the best news. Definitely not put on the short-term IR of right now that we know yet, but could be possible. And he's looking to probably miss a little bit more substantial time.
Yeah. And before I talk about this, I want to make it clear that with my analysis of Treylon Burks, everything I just talked about, there was much more evidence involved, and I'm much more confident in my evaluation of his injury because of what we heard him say and then saw him do. and the nature of his injury, like the prognosis, we know he's back on the 12th day of an injury that's supposed to take 2 to 4 weeks. Clearly he's back on the front end of that injury, and so maybe ready to go soon. With Kyle Phillips, this is much more vibes based. So if I'm wrong about this, I won't be surprised, but this is what it came across to me as, and you take this with a grain of salt however you'd like. We didn't see him out there. He was not out there participating in practice. We did talk to him in the locker room. He had a knee brace on. He seemed he talked about how he was thankful that it's not a worst case scenario, that he's going to be able to come back this season. And so, like, there's no worry there. He will be back. It's just a matter of when. And the thing that he said that most stuck with me, JT, and has me pessimistic, not that he'll come back ever, but that I think his injury prognosis is like 3 to 6 weeks. The reason why I'm kind of thinking it may be all 6 of those weeks for him to be ready to go from when he did it, which was the Vikings game, right? So if 6 weeks from that Vikings game would be week 3. So playing in week 4 being your first time back, if that's what happens. He said to us, and I'm paraphrasing here, but we asked him, like, what's the pain tolerance right now? Are you able to do some things now in rehab that you weren't able to do previously? Like, are you already getting back to some movement? And his response was, yeah, man, they've got me in this brace, and this brace is great. They're doing a great job with it. And so, like, I can walk now and it doesn't hurt. It's not really a ring endorsement of health if the best you have to offer is, well, now I can walk around without pain. If that's the best, he didn't say that's the best he can do right now, but that's the first thing he offered up. And so, like, I read into that. If I'm reading the tea leaves, that screams, okay, he's in a good place, but there's some significant progress still to be made in terms of pain tolerance and in terms of healing and recovery. So I think it's a good news, bad news thing. And it's ultimately, I think, a net good news because Treylon Burks and somebody tweeted to me this the other day. I'm sorry, I can't. I think yesterday somebody said in my comments this, and I can't credit them because I forget who it was, but somebody said something along the lines of, Treylon Burks is much more of a necessity to this team's passing game, whereas Kyle Phillips is much more of a luxury to this team's passing game. I think that's the perfect way of putting it. I think that they are both very valuable assets, but in terms of importance to the success of this passing game, Treylon Burks is much more vital than a Kyle Phillips is. That's not to say that Kyle Phillips, when healthy and in the rotation, can't be a massive impact. I think he can be just as impactful as Treylon Burks, but in terms of needs versus wants, Kyle Phillips is more of a want. Treylon Burks is more of a need. So having him back first, if you had to pick one to come back early, it'd be Treylon Burks. So that's good news for those guys.
And then we can move on to this Texans news. And boy, oh boy, are the Texans in trouble right now. So earlier today, it was pointed out that the Texans could be down 3 starting offensive linemen against the Ravens in the first week, including tackle Titus Howard, who had, of course, hand surgery, and his status is still being determined. Rookie Juice Scruggs has a strained hamstring and has been sidelined. And then what just came down the pipe at the Texans place guard Kenyon Green, who was their very high first round draft pick last season, on IR. So his season is now over. With that, the Texans made a trade today, getting offensive lineman Kendrick Green, not to mistake that with Kenyon Green, Kendrick Green, from
literally the Walmart brand replacement.
So yeah, they got George Fant. They just traded for this guy, but man, CJ Stroud is going to have a rough time.
Friends, lay a hand of prayer on our brother CJ Stroud. Lord, I have seen what you've done in others' lives, and I want that for CJ Stroud. Please lay a shroud of protection over him this season. Please don't allow him to go the way of Bryce Young and get murdered in the pocket all year long. We'd like to see both of these guys play, and I'm terrified now for CJ Stroud playing behind. Now they're looking at starting the season at least with 2 of their starting 5. Is that am I right?
About
there?
Yeah, like that's
2 of their starting 5 offensive linemen.
You're gonna have Laramie Tunsil for sure.
Which he needs to. I mean, Laramie needs to make a backpack out of this team and carry them because
he's kind of getting paid like it though. So
he is. So like, if anyone can do it, he can. He's one of maybe the best tackle in the league. Frankly,
yeah, I would say they have Laramie Tunsil at the left tackle, and then of course when they traded for Shaq Mason at the right tackle, they have those two. So right now, Kendrick Green is kind of penciled in right now as that replacement center for the Texans right now. Titus Howard is of course out right now with a hand injury, so George Fant's going to be in there, and then someone else. Like there's got to be someone else, you know.
Man, that's tough. Like Alex Titan pointing out, Texans about to put CJ Stroud in a David Carr situation. You really hope that's not the case, but I hope he can run and gun because he's going to be doing a lot of running so that he can be gunning this year. Tough scene down there in Houston.
Yeah, and then we can move on to just some other things that happened today with the roster cutdowns. A very interesting trade went down earlier involving Denver, who was reported to actually be cutting / waiving tight end Albert O. Not going to say his last name because, as me and you talked earlier, it's too hard to say.
There are some players' names in the league that we abbreviate for convenience, and there are some players' names in the league that we abbreviate out of necessity. He is the latter. I can't say. Okwubunomnom. That's the best I got. I have no idea. I need a phonetics dictionary.
But he was Albert O was a promising rookie that we've had our eyes on for quite some time now.
Couple of seasons now.
That he's been a very good option at the tight end if he just
he still is promising.
If he just wasn't hurt all the time and lost his job to Greg Dulcich. But he has been traded to the Philadelphia Eagles. So the Broncos trade Albert O and a 2025 7th to the Eagles for a 2025 6th round pick. So the Eagles just keep on getting richer, you know, like
get richer.
Yeah.
Good for Howie Roseman. Yeah. The Eagles get him for pennies because the Broncos had announced, and he was a depth cut. He was not a talent cut, right? Like everybody knew when they saw him being cut, like it's because this Denver tight end room is very deep. He's going to be cut, but land on a 53-man roster somewhere. No doubt about it. He does. And so when they announced he's going to be cut before the transaction goes through with the league, the Eagles and Howie Roseman swoop by. Hey, I see you got a tight end in there that you don't have any use for. We'd love him. And we'll even slide you just a tiny little more. We'll swap a 6th and 7th for you in 2 seasons from now if we can get the priority on him. And Denver was like, what the heck? We were going to throw him away anyways. Have at it. And so the Eagles get a talented tight end to bolster that room. Good for them. Do we have the other Eagles news, by the way, in the news rundown?
I don't, but
just mention it real quick because I want to continue to be mad at the Eagles for a moment.
Of course, it was reported earlier this season. I think it was Isaiah Rodgers.
Isaiah Rodgers was going to be their number 1 outside cornerback to go into the season in a contract year, maybe like a Christian Fulton breakout situation for him.
He was a guy who was suspended this year because of gambling. However, so his season was done. He was released by the Colts, not on a roster. However, the Eagles go ahead and say, we have a spot on our roster and we'll sign you and we'll just wait until next year.
We'll just stash you fantasy football style. We'll just see you can't play right now. Fine. We've got a stud roster. We've got room, baby. We've got room to spare. Who needs depth when you've got 47 great players that are in front of him? And so they get this is an if, like they are taking a gamble here because Isaiah Rodgers is the number one in terms of all the gambling infractions in the NFL so far, has made the most egregious infraction of them all. He was gambling on his team, bold-faced, like really super duper cheating, not just accident. No, he was super duper cheating. He may never come back. The league may make an example of him and say he can't play for the next 7 years and age him out. But if he does come back next year, perhaps, the Eagles have gotten themselves a starting caliber outside cornerback literally for free. It's frustrating. It's infuriating that they can do this, but they can. So you know what? Good for them. Can't blame them.
Yeah, and then finally, just 2 other things to note here. The Jonathan Taylor saga continues on, but there is no end in sight as the Colts will not be trading all-pro running back Jonathan Taylor, source confirms. After a long saga with Indy and owner Jim Irsay, Jonathan Taylor will remain with the team on the PUP list, which means he will not be able to play for the first 4 games at least. Next opportunity for him to be traded is this season at the trade deadline. And then even after that, this was the last year of his contract. So the Indianapolis Colts could totally just franchise tag him. And this saga continues onwards.
It's a diva off in Indianapolis.
It really is. And if all I have to say on that is that if you drafted your fantasy football leagues already, I am so sorry. I'm so sorry
what are you
to the person.
I'm not sorry. You're reaping what you're sowing. If you've already drafted, shame on you. Shouldn't have done it. Hope you learned your lesson.
And then finally, just an interesting thing that I would not be surprised to see the Titans go out and maybe give this guy a look. Sure. A bit of surprise from Cincinnati camp as the Bengals released punt returner / wide receiver Trent Taylor, who had 5 punts returns of 20 plus yards last year. And he also averaged 14.5 yards per return this season during the preseason. He was a guy that just obviously was a depth cut because as we've mentioned before on this show, your boy, Andre Iosivas, as everyone wrote you off on that one.
Rise up. I hope James is still around. He was making fun of Andre. Hey, look at me now, baby. I can evaluate players, James.
Andre Iosivas and Charlie Jones, 2 rookies, beat him out on the roster. So he's a guy who is available to be signed. But someone actually pointed out to us that his parents live here in Nashville and he trains with Jeremy Holt over at Lipscomb Academy.
Yeah.
So a Nashville guy, definitely if Kearis Jackson is not working out as a punt returner, could be a guy to look into.
And I wouldn't say it's likely they go after him because he would cost some money. You got to put him on the roster. Like he's on the older side, but he does have more returnability prowess than a guy like Kearis Jackson. I think that they're going to want to go with their guy and like see what they've got in a guy that's practically free in Kearis Jackson, but wouldn't shock me if he's still available and they've decided maybe not. They move on from him. All right. Is that it from us in the news today, JT?
Yeah, that's going to be it.
All right. That is JT with the news. And that is our show. An hour and a half banger of a show. One of our best. Ton of participation in the comments. Appreciate you all being here with us. A couple of things. First of all, you know what? Before I close, Logan has an interesting question here. In 3 years, Titans fan regret X being cut, and player X today is the guy we have forgotten of, but are upset over today. Okay, so he's saying who was cut that was a mistake, and who was cut that people think is a mistake but isn't. That's fascinating. Let me look. I think the player that was cut that is most likely to be a mistake is probably. You know what? I'll say Alize Mack still. And I get he was injured. They waived him for injury, but I think that he's got some upside in the league, and it wouldn't shock me at all if he is hopefully they keep him around on the practice squad. But if they don't, it wouldn't shock me if he went somewhere and became something. And then the guy that people are who are people mad? I mean, like just playing the odds. People are mad that the team cut Eric Aguirre. Ultimately, I don't think he's people probably be somebody people forget about. So I'll say Alize Mack was a mistake and Eric Aguirre may be proven to be not one, although maybe both deserve, maybe everybody's right. Both deserved to be on the team. And there just wasn't enough room on such a talented team as the Titans. With that, we're going to wrap it up today. We do on Thursday have a really big announcement. JT, I know you and I are super duper excited about this. We've got a partner, the first of hopefully many here with the Hot Read podcast. And, we're going to be working with them in person on Thursday nights, right before Thursday Night Football, during the week, the game weeks when we are previewing the upcoming Titans game, doing the best bet gauntlet. We're going to win a lot more money this year as we did last year. A certified, professional, better, approved system that you and I have. We are the most professional amateur bettors out there. We make coin and we do so amateurly, but it's listen, as far as non-pro bettors go, I think we're the best that you can get is basically what I'm saying here. So we're going to do all that live on Thursday nights before Thursday Night Football on location here at a place of business in the Nashville area. So if you're a local, you're going to be, and then after we do the shows, we're going to be hanging out watching the game at this place. So you just come hang out and spend your Thursday Night Football viewing experience with us talking ball. Going to be a ton of fun. We'll announce that on Thursday, on Thursday's live show, Friday's episode. So make sure to be a part of that live so you can hear the announcement and plan accordingly this year because Thursday nights are going to be awesome. And then just a couple of housekeeping things. Make sure to follow us on social media at Hot Read Pod on Twitter, on Instagram, on TikTok. Best place to find our content that isn't the full show. We do a lot of clips and highlights, as well as especially on the Twitter account, knowing when the lives are going to be up, show notes on when the live show is available for you to join the conversation. Very important that you follow the Twitter for that kind of info. Make sure you rate and review, subscribe, do all those good things wherever you get the podcasts. Subscribe to the Broadway Sports Media YouTube channel. A lot of you guys watch and you're not subscribed. Make sure you're subscribed real quick before you leave. Very helpful to us to grow that channel. And then Zen Sportsbook, our newest sports betting partner, newest sports betting option here in the state of Tennessee. Sign up with code HOTPOD, HOTPOD, code HOTPOD to get a 5% welcome bonus cash back in your pocket, 5% of your betting volume for the first 15 days. Back in your pocket, win or lose. That's Zen Sportsbook, the newest betting option here in the state of Tennessee. With that, JT, a marathon of an episode, but a great one. Appreciate you. Appreciate everybody tuning in. We'll be back on Thursday afternoon talking Titans. First thing Friday morning in your podcast feed. Until then, for producer JT, I'm your host, Easton Freeze. This has been the Hot Read Podcast. We'll talk to you then.